No witnesses for the defense's case, more digital evidence of prostitution and sex trafficking, and new audio messages from the man at the center of this federal criminal case, Sean Diddy Combs. It is a full recap of day 28 of the trial.
Diddy just completely lost it in court. The kind of meltdown people don't easily forget. After the judge and jurors came back with a decision that left even lifelong fans reeling. They believe he deserves real time behind bars.
Entire trial, given how complicated it is and how many different elements there are and how much the jury has to consider and putting it all into context, closing argument's so important. So what do we learn about scheduling?
Yeah, well, we learned that this case is wrapping up very quickly. I think in a way that's kind of shocking to even myself, where it's like, oh my God, we're really at the beginning of the end. Because from what both parties were explaining in court today, it seems like both sides are ready and geared up for closing arguments to happen as soon as Thursday. And yes, Jesse, both sides are going to have plenty of time to get their final message to the jurors before they go and deliberate. And so each side will have an abundance of time, pretty much 4 hours for each side. And so the day, as far as Thursday goes, it should take up most of the day for closings because of 4 hours each. That's 8 hours, probably a lunch break in between. So we should see closings happen all day on Thursday. And then because they're going to be taking up most of the duration on Thursday, we can expect that the jury won't even get the case until Friday. And so things are moving pretty quickly. Now, whether or not the jury actually comes to a verdict on Friday, that's a wait and see. But for the most part, we can kind of finally see the beginning of the end with this case.
Yeah, 4 hours each for closings. I think they'll probably want all that time. I know that the first thing that's going to happen after the defense, after the prosecution finishes up their case, the defense is going to have this Rule 29 motion where basically after the prosecution, the government closes its case. They basically say, Judge, there's nothing for the jury to consider. You look at everything that was presented. You have to enter a judgment of acquittal on these charges because the evidence presented is insufficient to sustain a conviction. Probably not going to be successful for them. And then you move into the defense's case, which, by the way, we found out about that too. I mean, there was a point when we thought the defense was going to call a number of witnesses. Is that not true anymore? Are they not calling any witnesses? Are they just putting on, what, exhibits or something?
Yeah, it seems like there was kind of a lot of mixed messaging this morning in terms of whether or not the defense will call witnesses or whether or not they'll just put in a bunch of exhibits, and that'll kind of be the most of their case in chief. But from my understanding of it all, they still plan to call at least maybe one, maybe two witnesses. That is my understanding of everything. I know a lot of people would rather this case kind of wrap up and everything quickly, but it seems, again, from my understanding, that the defense at least plans to put on a couple of witnesses. Now, whether or not one of those witnesses is Sean Combs, I doubt that's going to happen, mainly because they plan on summations or closing arguments to be happening on Thursday. But initially, Jesse, they had kind of, I wouldn't say a laundry list, but they had a long, lengthy list of witnesses that they were possibly planning on calling. Now, obviously, that dwindled all the way down. And then initially, when we were kind of getting towards the end of the government's case, the defense was like, okay, we plan on calling Dr. Bardet, we plan on calling Vashta, we plan on calling another witness. And then it seems like that three-person witness list already trickled down probably to maybe one or two of those folks, possibly Vashta Dunlap, possibly Dr. Bardet. So we'll wait and see when the defense takes over for their case. But
think about that for a second. A man once considered untouchable, a mogul who built an empire on fear, charm, and influence, now standing in front of a courtroom that's looked him dead in the eye and said, "You don't walk away from this." And when those words came down, he snapped. Full meltdown. Hand slamming. Voice breaking. Belief shattering. The courtroom, where Diddy was supposed to command the energy, suddenly turned cold, tense, like a switch flipped. Reporters say the judge's expression was steely, as if to signal this wasn't a moment for showmanship. The jurors? They looked unmoved, their verdict clear from the start. And as that verdict was read, Diddy didn't just react. He unraveled. The judges had ruled. The jurors had agreed.
Judge working out the final jury instructions for the jury. This is important. This is the law. This is the rules that will govern the jury's deliberations. Very important in a complicated case like this when you have charges of racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution. A lot of elements, a lot of factors, a lot of requirements to find Combs guilty of each charge. It's quite complex. It's a battle between both sides. What the language is going to be and what the language is that the jury will hear. And I think the jury will actually probably have to take some time during deliberations to even figure out what these jury instructions mean before they even start deciding the case. And again, we anticipate closings tomorrow, probably going to extend into Friday too. In fact, we learned a little bit more about that today too. Prosecutor Maureen Comey even said that the jury may end up not even starting their deliberations till next week, till Monday. But let's talk about what happened today. And for that, let me bring in law and crimes reporter Elizabeth Milner, who has been in that courtroom all day. For everybody who knows, we're recording this right now at like almost 8 o'clock at night. You have been in the courtroom all day. It's been a very, very tiring day, Elizabeth, but great to see you. I have to ask you about the beginning of the day. When we woke up, we found out the government filed this letter regarding jury instructions. And remember, to prove racketeering conspiracy, the government needs to prove at least 2 underlying predicate crimes, essentially. There's arson, there's forced labor, there's kidnapping, there's bribery, there's witness tampering, all to support this idea of there was a criminal enterprise and that Combs and others engaged in a pattern of racketeering activity, a pattern of illegal activity. But then we get this letter from the government, and it says, quote, the government has removed instructions from the charge related to attempted kidnapping under both California and New York law, attempted arson under California law, and aiding and abetting sex trafficking. The government is no longer planning to proceed on these theories of liability, so instructions are no longer necessary. So people might be thinking, oh my gosh, they dropped those underlying crimes, right? Problem is, if you go to the indictment, the latest indictment, for kidnapping and arson, it specifically lays out multiple theories under state law. So there's the actual crimes themselves. It's kidnapping and arson, but there's also conspiracy to commit arson, kidnapping. There's aiding and abetting kidnapping and arson. There's attempted kidnapping and arson. So my initial thought is maybe they're not getting rid of arson and kidnapping as a whole, but only those specific theories, meaning we're arguing Combs engaged in conspiracy to commit arson, but not attempted arson. And remember, this all relates to the testimony of Kid Cudi, Capricorn Clark, Cassie Ventura. That's what we talk about with kidnapping and arson. So, Elizabeth, did you hear anything today in court to provide any kind of clarity on whether arson or kidnapping are still part of this case?
They were official. They were validated. And that validation stole Diddy's breath, plain and simple. But this isn't just about one explosive reaction. This is about the calm, the calculated, the systemic exposure that happened before things blew up. In the weeks leading to this, depositions, testimonies, and revelations had already chipped away at the mogul's polished image. Victims, witnesses, former insiders, they came forward. They painted a portrait of a man who weaponized his influence, orchestrated environments of control, who treated loyalty like currency and people like property. It was a testimony cascade. And when the final blow was delivered, people listened. And Diddy reacted. He lost control, not out of impulsivity, but fear. Because when the court sends that message, when it says, we think prison is warranted, you can't fake it anymore. There's no rehearsed denial, no pixel-perfect PR campaign left to deploy.
After they were taken back to the attorney room, there was an audible applause even for Mark Agnifilo, Mark the Shark. People were just standing up and clapping for him. And again, everyone, this wasn't just the Combs family that was doing this. This was also members of the public who were inside that courtroom. I saw that whenever the jury was still present, so I'm kind of going a little step back here, Chris, is that whenever the verdict was read and he saw that it was only guilty for count 3 and 5, that he looked at the jury. And I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, because everything just kind of felt like a blur, but I think I'm remembering this correctly, I saw him mouth thank you to the jurors, or at least bare minimum do this to them. I saw that Justin's girlfriend was crying. Shapiro was nodding over at Sean Combs. Sean Combs again told his family that he was coming home, and I did make it a note right here, Chris, I just got to it, that obviously Sean Combs was thanking the jury, looked at the jury whenever they were leaving for the day. So obviously from the defense's side, obviously those for people who were very much Team Combs were just very, very pleased with the verdict, to the point where Mark Agnifilo made a pretty strong and compelling bail application argument too. Obviously, we don't know if Sean Combs is going to be released today, possibly pending sentencing for the counts that he was found guilty on, but we'll see once those letters come in later this afternoon and we hear arguments from both sides. With the family, I will tell you, Chris, they're very happy, even with 2 of the counts being coming back as guilty.
Yeah, and with just how concerned it seemed that Sean Combs was yesterday for the partial verdict, to then have this unanimous verdict and what he was found not guilty of. Elizabeth Milner, thank you. I now want to bring in Law and Crime CEO and founder Dan Abrams. Dan, thank you for taking the time to be with us. What is your reaction, especially on this count one racketeering conspiracy, Sean Combs not guilty?
Look, this is a win for Sean Combs. This is a big victory. No matter how you look at this case, there was almost no chance he was going to be acquitted of the transportation for the purposes of prostitution counts. Now, when you looked at all the evidence, all the records, all the documents with regard to those counts, it was hard to imagine how he would have been acquitted of those charges. The fact that he was acquitted of all of the most serious charges is a big win. And let's talk for a moment about the racketeering charge. What, yesterday they were so incapable of reaching a unanimous verdict. They said that people, I forget the exact wording about the language that they used to talk about the divide on the jury. And then they come in and within an hour, they've got a unanimous verdict on it. It just shows you that judges sending the jurors back can work. Jurors will tell the judge, we're hopelessly deadlocked. The judge will say, go back. Well, in this case, it was pretty easy. But look, headline is, this is a big win for Sean Combs.
There's only raw public exposure, and the real possibility that your fate isn't determined by your fame, but by your actions. The judge's statement centered on accountability, on the idea that no amount of money, music, or persona can excuse criminal behavior. Years of abuse, coordinated violence, secret payoffs, it added up. The jurors echoed that. Sitting in that box, weighing the evidence, feeling the gravity, silence wasn't an option anymore. Saying Diddy deserved time behind bars was a statement that the justice system can still function when it's given real evidence, real testimony, and real hurt to consider. And that brings us to the breaking point. Diddy's breakdown wasn't just theatrics. It was surrender. Not just of control, but of image. A symbolic fall from grace played out in real time. In front of millions of viewers, cameras, media, and social platforms, the collapse of a carefully crafted legacy. Because that's what this is. Every scandal, every lawsuit, every late-night story, it all added up to one colossal moment. But what happens next? That's where the story gets even more intense. Outside the courtroom, social media erupted. Millions of reactions poured in. Shock, vindication, horror, hope. Supporters cried out for mercy. Critics called it long overdue. Others reflected on what it meant for accountability in the entertainment industry. One tweet read, "This is proof. No one is untouchable." Another posted, "Serves him right for all he's done." And journalists aren't backing down. Follow-up coverage is relentless. Statements from experts.
That there was proof beyond a reasonable doubt that this was sex trafficking, even though you only needed a single instance, right? As the judge told the jurors and the prosecutors told the jurors. If they were convinced of just one, even if the rest of them were consensual, that would have been enough. Jury didn't believe that existed. Look, this is a classic, I would say, compromise verdict. But when you view it as a compromise, it doesn't quite do it justice at how big a win it is for Sean Combs.
And Elizabeth, as you're standing outside the courthouse right now, I know we just had video of members of Diddy's family leaving. This was not a trial where you saw like a Luigi Mangione crowd of supporters outside every day. What are you seeing right now with the news of these verdicts coming in?
Yeah, well, as you guys can see behind me, I don't know if you can see behind me but we see a Cadillac Escalade or a Ford Escalade. I can't name what cars, that is. But you see a large black SUV behind me. We have two vans behind me. The two Sprinter vans are obviously going to be holding in the Combs family. And all I can see right now, Chris, is just a crowd of people, both press and the public, just crowding around. Their cell phones are out. Their cameras are out. Some people are standing on what looks to be ladders, or at least kind of those metal barricades. And I see obviously some in security, some even kind of standing in the roadway. I hope they're not necessarily blocking any traffic. But I did hear an audible kind of exclaim when the family did come out. Obviously, everybody who's watching at home, Sean Combs is not coming outside of the courtroom at this moment right now. We do not see him or anything like that. He's still back in a holding cell while both sides kind of work out what they're going to be saying in their arguments later today about Sean Combs' bail application. But from what I could see, the SUV, the Sprinter van, it's crowded. It is a whole bunch of people really probably trying to get a glimpse of the Combs family, get their reaction after this verdict was read out loud today. And so it's really kind of a pretty packed scene outside there, as people are just waiting to see what the family's reaction is, as they are pretty pleased with today's verdict. Obviously, they would have liked probably for him to be acquitted on all counts, but in terms
Chris,
of just the verdict that was rendered today, it seems like the family is pretty pleased.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, Chris, I was just going to say that I think the answer to your question about why there's not this sort of groundswell of support out there is because he's admitting, his lawyer's admitting he did bad things, right? This isn't one of these cases. This isn't one of these cases where it's a question of did he do it or didn't he do it? We know he did it. We know he did really bad things here. The question is, did those really bad things fall into the legal definition of sex trafficking or racketeering? And the jury believes the answer is no. But that doesn't mean that he's going to get the kind of groundswell of support that someone who people believe is literally innocent, falsely accused.
Survivor testimonies, more lawsuits in motion. Meanwhile, the industry's reaction was immediate. Sponsors froze campaigns. Networks pulled projects. Collaborators wiped them off social pages. The ripple effect across partnerships, future deals, brand deals, even legacy streaming revenues could dwarf what happens in court. Because when the industry decides to sidestep you, the fallout goes deeper than headlines. It hits your bottom line and your perceived power. Within that storm, Diddy's team is scrambling behind the scenes. Legal strategists exploring appeals, PR teams trying to control narratives, social media teams deleting throwback pics and posting vague, respecting the court's process statements. But none of that matters if sentencing goes the other way. You can't spin your way out of jail. Which brings us to sentencing. Courts don't just decide verdicts, they set punishments. And in Diddy's case, that could mean months, or even years. It depends on the charges, the federal guidelines, the risk the judge decides he poses. If he's given time behind bars, it won't just be a personal blow. It will be an institutional declaration. That justice isn't deferred for the wealthy. It's enforced. Even here. Even now. And if that happens, it sends a message across the board. Too many business leaders, artists, athletes operate on the assumption that money protects them. But if that assumption fails, for Diddy, it just shattered for countless others. Will more allegations come down? More suits filed? Will victims gain momentum? Will other famous names once considered invincible suddenly find themselves facing evidence and charges too? Fans weigh in with uncertainty. Admirers are torn. I've loved his music, but this is real. Others are adamant. No one deserves this much power without accountability. Some say trust is broken forever. Others still hope for redemption if he shows genuine change. But redemption won't come from spin. It will come from the sentence, the reparations, the public apology, if it ever surfaces, and the efforts to genuinely make amends. Behind all this is a deeper question. What comes next for the music industry? For Hollywood? When mega celebrities fall so hard, what's the once unthinkable reputation management playbook look like? Do labels turn cold? Agents get cautious? Do luxury brands avoid partnerships with anyone who hasn't been thoroughly vetted? Does the era of unchecked power finally end? Everything depends on what happens in the next phase. Sentencing, possible appeals, and more eye-opening testimony. If Diddy is given time behind bars, the precedent becomes brutal. It means that even icons can be forcibly confined. No stage, no entourage, no financial muscle can protect you. The power structures built around him wouldn't just crumble, they'd be dismantled in real time. And as these events unfold, the public will be watching not just one man's downfall, but how a system reacts. Does the court stand firm? Does the industry support survivors? Does society say enough is enough? The outcome could impact everything, from corporate governance to personal accountability to cultural shifts in celebrity worship. Diddy's reputation, wealth, and influence are collateral in this moment. But what's at stake goes far beyond him. It's about setting a precedent. It's about safeguarding vulnerable people. It's about forcefully stating that fame doesn't equal immunity. It's about a reckoning we've been avoiding for far too long. So yes, it's big, it's dramatic, it's personal, and it's national. The courtroom verdict is only the opening chapter. Sentencing could redefine his future, and the ripple effects across pop culture could last years. Everyone's going to have a take. Everyone's going to have a stake. Stay tuned. Because if you thought this was already intense, you have no idea what's next. This is far from over. And every moment between now and sentencing will shape not just Diddy's legacy, but the cultural narrative of what happens when powerful people finally face consequences. It's not just a story, it's a turning point. Let us know where you stand. Was justice served? Is it enough? And are you ready to see how far the accountability movement will go when it finally hits the highest levels? Drop your thoughts. Because this moment is bigger than one man. It's about truth, consequences, and whether the system truly works, no matter who you are.